Ever wonder why 95% of leads do not convert? Why cold call rates are down and prospects don't open our emails? Why our responses of robocalls and implanting pixels to track user interaction, mostly without permission, is backfiring spectacularly? Well, that's what we intend to find out here in the Buyer Side Chat podcast. There are scores of podcasts about selling, but most miss the shift that has come upon the buying-selling process. The initiative has since moved from the supply to the demand side. The Buyer Side Chat, your podcast of record for B2B buying, talks to actual buyers, persons, not personas, in the quest to understand the real buyer's journey, their trials and tribulations, challenges and outcomes they're striving for. Welcome to the Buyer Side Chat. Thank you for your time and for joining us on this session. I have a favor to ask. While you continue to listen to the podcast, please leave a comment or rating at iTunes or wherever else you get your podcasts from. I personally look at each comment and will give a shout out to each of you in our next episodes. It means a lot to hear from you. Today, we have with us Jens Hentschel, the founder and managing director of the FIVIS partnership that consults sales, procurement, and supply chain management teams on how to build winning customer-centric business relationships.
Over the last 15 years, the procurement profession has changed dramatically. If you look into what was the main goal 15 years ago, it was pretty much consolidate the supply chains, consolidate the number of suppliers that you have, find cheaper suppliers, cost reduce, cost optimize. That was the main focus for procurement professionals. And where we are today and where the best organizations are in that field today, it's all about identifying the best external capabilities, so supplier capabilities, and match them with the internal needs that I have as a business. As a buyer, the main job today is actually to spend with your internal stakeholders to understand what are their needs, right? How can I help them accomplish whatever they need to accomplish? A CMO, a CTO, a head of R&D, they articulate together with me what their needs are. I might be challenging them on what their needs are, if they should change their needs, and I give them my perspective on the market, on the supplier market, on how we can best marry their needs with the external capabilities that I have identified. So this is, in a nutshell, the main shift from moving from just squeezing suppliers, if you wish, negotiating with suppliers to get a discount, to really, truly understanding what is the internal business need, and then identifying the best capability out there and forming true partnership with external suppliers. That is the paradigm shift in procurement today.
Jens Hentschel is the founder and managing director of the FIVIS partnership. He consults sales, procurement, and supply chain management teams on how to build winning customer-centric business relationships. Jens has more than 13 years of experience in procurement and professional buying and worked for some of the largest companies in this domain. Over his career, he held senior global procurement leadership positions at Procter Gamble and was procurement and supply chain management director at KFC. Jens obtained a MSc degree in International Management from the Rotterdam School of Management, Erasmus University, and lives and works now in London. Now, on to this great episode with Jens Hentschel. Jens, welcome to the Buyer Side Chat. I'm delighted to have you here, and thank you for making time so quickly. It's really very nice of you. I was reading your article in LinkedIn with great interest, and I said I must reach out to you and have this chat. So here we go.
Thanks to Baljon for having me. Really appreciate that.
You're welcome. There is a sea change in the way the buying, selling activity is playing out today. I'm talking primarily of B2B, than it was playing out, say, 15 years back. You have had a very close overview of procurement, and you have seen this up close, large organizations. What changes are you seeing, and would you agree at all that this change is happening and it's major?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, John, and maybe let me just give you a little bit of background on my journey in procurement. I've been in procurement all my career. I'm really passionate about procurement. I've been working many years for companies such as Procter Gamble, for instance, and just until recently, I stepped out of that corporate role and stepped into more of a consultancy role. And when I did that 2.5 years ago with a couple of colleagues of mine, for us that was the first time where we could really, have a frank and open discussion with our ex-suppliers, with sales teams, on how they actually perceive procurement and the buying process. Because when I was in my corporate role, what we were doing was just normal. And just to put it into perspective, what P&G and FMCG is doing is really considered as a golden standard in the procurement discipline. So I really felt, okay, what we are doing, that we're collaborative with our suppliers, that we're trying to build value with our suppliers, that we are an in-house commercial consultant to our stakeholders is the norm. But as soon as I start talking to my ex-suppliers and sales teams, I realized there is a different perception of procurement out there, of the buying discipline in general. And it's not a very good perception, unfortunately. And that really made me wonder and think, this is actually not good, because we as professional buyers, we are relying on the best suppliers out there and on sales teams that do actually understand what our needs are, how we tick, what makes us tick, what our KPIs are, how we act internally vis-a-vis our stakeholders, what we need to deliver for the end consumer. And there seems to be a disconnect that procurement is perceived a little bit as sometimes a blocker, as a value destroyer, as just saying no, not engaging with the supplier enough. And we really felt that we had to change that. We wanted to elaborate or explain and shed light into what it is actually like to be on the procurement side, what it is actually like to be a professional buyer. And there's a lot of things that are happening. I mean, as you rightfully said, over the last 15 years, the procurement profession has changed dramatically. If you look into what was the main goal 15 years ago, it was pretty much consolidate the supply chains, consolidate the number of suppliers that you have, find cheaper suppliers, cost reduce, cost optimize. That was the main focus for procurement professionals. And where we are today, and where the best organizations are in that field today, it's all about identifying the best external capabilities, so supplier capabilities, and match them with the internal needs that I have as a business. So as a buyer, the main job today is actually to spend with your internal stakeholders to understand what are their needs, right? How can I help them accomplish whatever they need to accomplish? A CMO, a CTO, a head of R&D, they articulate together with me what their needs are. I might be challenging them on what their needs are, if they should change their needs. And I give them my perspective on the market, on the supplier market, on how we can best marry their needs with the external capabilities that I have as a procurement professional identified. So this is, in a nutshell, the main shift from moving from just, squeezing suppliers, if you wish, negotiating with suppliers to get a discount, to really, truly understanding what is the internal business need, challenging and being the devil advocate internally on really getting to the bottom of what the need is, and then identifying the best capability out there and forming true partnership with external suppliers. That is the paradigm shift in procurement today.
Absolutely. So 2 quick questions that come up. One is that the perspective that the sales narrative has is that they have a service or a product and they can go out and market it, and then they can go in and sell it. And that fundamentally is disconnected from the premise that you just described, because the need within the organization where you are as a procurement specialist, that need is possibly arising much earlier than when this activity at the sales end is happening, right? So what they're essentially doing or talking of is that if there are 5 companies who are ready to buy today, let us identify them. I mean, just to connect it back to a sales reality, that less than 5% of the leads get converted to sales. Now, there is something fundamentally wrong there, right? I mean, nothing with a 5% success rate will be called successful anywhere else in the world, right? But in sales, we consider that acceptable. So where is this disconnect actually originating? Where is the gap? Now that you're talking to the vendor community much more closely, where do you find this gap in understanding?
Yeah, I do perceive it that the whole buying process is not maybe very well understood from the sales community. If I bring it back to a professional procurement organization, we have a very structured approach on how we, internally debate on the business need, when we're going to go out and analyze the market, how we set up our sourcing strategy, how we approach then the suppliers through a RFP, RFQ negotiating process, how we set up our contracts, and how we manage then the relationship with the supplier. So this is we are a very process-driven function. So by the time we reach out to you as a supplier, as a vendor, there's a lot of pre-work that has already happened, potentially, right? So I just described that: internal analysis, market analysis, sourcing strategy, elaboration. And at step 4, that's only when we might get into contact with you, right? So we have built a lot of knowledge already. We have, I'm not necessarily would say we've made up our minds, but we had an internal debate. We have screened the market. So we've built a lot of knowledge before we approach you. And I think this is probably, what I hear a lot of salespeople get to realize now as well, that their customer is much more knowledgeable than, let's say, 10 years ago, right? So there's a lot of more data out there, much more analysis that is done before you actually engage first with your supplier. So that is obviously something to take into consideration. Now, the other point that I would like to highlight here is that obviously there is a lot of analysis being done upfront before I reach out to a supplier as a procurement professional, but I rely heavily on suppliers providing me with information to build actually my internal capability to talk to my internal stakeholder, to elaborate my market analysis, and to craft my sourcing strategy. So what I'm trying to say here is, you as a salesperson, instead of going and heavily market your solution and your product, I always recommend the sales community to reach out early and to build a relationship with procurement and help them build and create their knowledge base. Just give you an example. I mean, when I was working for P&G, I was always eager to meet suppliers, incumbent suppliers, or players that I didn't work with on a regular basis, just to, even if I had a business need or not, just to understand what is happening out there in the market. What is my competition doing? Do I fully understand the market, or is there some gaps that we have as an organization that I should be addressing as a procurement professional and we as an organization as a whole? So that mind shift change of going after only going after customers that are ready to buy is probably counterintuitive. My pledge would always be, build a strong and meaningful relationship with your procurement community, because you can help them build their knowledge base. You can provide them with information that positions you well, then when a demand arises, that you're part of their portfolio of suppliers that they want to consider. And on that very note, another example that I can give you there is the budget setting process. So if you take the FMCG sector is a good example here. Obviously, there's many listed companies, so you have a quarterly budget setting process. And the finance community is obviously interested, what are we going to pay for a service or for a raw material over the next 3 to 12 months, let's say. So the only entity in these organizations that can answer that question is procurement, because all the market knowledge, all the market analysis has been pretty much outsourced to that function. Nobody, just to give a very simple example, nobody in a P&G would ever know what the price of oil is or what the price is going to be in 12 months from now. They're looking for a forecast number though, and that forecast is given by procurement. So, and where does procurement build their knowledge on this commodity on? It's through their supply base. So if you as a supplier, again, have built a great relationship and supply information and insights on a regular basis, you have done a great sales job already, right? I mean, the selection of the supplier is just the cherry on the cake. But I mean, if I built a very reliable and insightful and meaningful relationship with you already upfront throughout these various steps that I need to take as a procurement professional, obviously you're going to be top of my list and top of mind when I select the suppliers. So these are just a few quick examples there where I see the perspective of salespeople could change or should change to create more value with their customer.
How many vendors, when you are looking at, say, in this example of oil, how many vendors would you be talking to at any point in time, or how many vendors have you found? So one is that ones you want to talk to, and you have found that there are few like the ones you think should be sort of building relationships in advance. So how many are you talking to at any point in time, and how many of them have actually taken the trouble to start building a relationship in advance?
Yeah, I mean, that is a very complex topic because it really depends on the industry you're in and what are you buying. So maybe to step a little bit back and give you a little bit of background on how we think as procurement professionals. Obviously, for us also, the day has only 24 hours, so we can only spend our time or allocate our time depending on where the priorities are. And how do we come up with our priorities? We segment in the first step the importance by spend. So you could have a relationship with a procurement professional that manages 100, 200, 300 millions of dollars in expenditures, company expenditures, with roughly 100, 200 suppliers, right? And obviously, naturally, you as a buyer, you gravitate in your first time allocation towards those suppliers with which you have the biggest spend with, right? So obviously the contract with the one supplier that is maybe 20, 30, 50 million is obviously more important than the supplier with which you only spend 200,000, right? And this is not because we're talking about savings here, it's just the opportunity to create value with a larger scale supplier is obviously bigger than with a smaller one, right? At least in this first assessment. So it's obviously important then as a seller, as a salesperson, to understand where do I fall in the grander scheme of things for this procurement professional? How much airtime will I get with this buyer, given the complexity on what he needs to be dealing with? Now, with the numbers of suppliers that we have, another misconception is that obviously we only are interested in costs and savings. But the main purpose of procurement is to assure supply, right? So I always say that also when I was managing teams, I was telling to my buyers, you will not get a promotion because of a 3% discount that you negotiate with a supplier, but you will get fired if we don't have the supply that is needed to produce a shampoo bottle, if we don't have the service that our marketing organization can run a marketing campaign. That is what gets you fired, because the CEO, the business unit leader, will immediately be on the phone and say, Jens, where is that product or service? We need to sell the product to our end consumer. And again, a discount is a nice to have, but not what gets you the promotion. So with regards to selecting the amount of suppliers, it really depends how you want to manage risk. Do you want to, for a commodity, want to have 100 suppliers or 5 suppliers? That really depends on how much risk you see by having just 5 vis-a-vis 100. Is there a market where maybe there's a monopoly situation where you can only interact with one supplier potentially? And again, the importance is a driving factor here. Just to highlight here and not to leave your listeners with the perception that we're only about money, there's a refinement of this categorization as well on how important you are as a supplier. So we also look into, is a supplier and consumer noticeable? So the service that you're providing me with, if you no longer supply it tomorrow, even if it's only $20,000 in the grand scheme of things, a very tiny amount, if you're no longer supplying me with that product or service tomorrow, will the end consumer notice? Will our operations fall over? And if the answer is yes, then you're probably also a very strategic supplier to me. And I probably, as a procurement professional, want to make sure that I not only have one supplier that can supply me with that product or service, but probably a multitude. And again, to answer the question, should it be 5, 10, or 2? It really, really depends on the industry, on the circumstances, and on the risk aversion or risk-taking willingness of that organization. A tool that procurement uses very often to assess risks in the market is the Porter 5 Forces analysis that you might be familiar with as well. It's a very, obviously, relatively old model, but I can only encourage every salesperson as well, go through the Porter analysis with your buyer's hat on and think of what risks and opportunities they see in the market. Because based on that analysis, you might be able to tell if they're going for a multitude of suppliers or maybe just one supplier and maybe just you as a vendor.
It's time for a short break. As I speak with numerous procurement professionals and specialized buyers, the role of procurement in future comes into question. Jens talks about a super procurer. I asked him how the role is evolving now that a lot of complex technology products are being bought by the end user directly. Jens unravels how he sees future procurement facilitating buying. Stay with us. You are listening to a Business Podcast Network original. Podcasting is the fastest growing content marketing opportunity, which is untapped. We can help you craft your audio strategy and help leverage the wide reach and easy streaming capability that the smartphone penetration provides. It is easy, it is powerful and personal. Talk to us to find out how podcasting can help you build your brand and reach out to your targets like never before. Write to us at bpn@bizcast.in. That is bpn@bizcast.in. Business Podcast Network. Podcasts end to end. Welcome back. Right before the break, I asked Jens how he sees the role of procurement evolving over the next couple of years with the rise of the buyer procurer. Let's hear him break down my question and share his views.
I have been talking to quite a few procurement professionals and professional buyers. And one of the things I hear is that, and this is especially with respect to digital products, and it sort of ties back to the fact that most procurement professionals think that their job is to save money. I hear a lot of the procurement professionals say that the fact that digital products are being bought by the buyer, the end user directly, the role of procurement is literally going down significantly in that space, because it's never very easy for procurement to understand what the real applications are, especially if it's a complex technology product. Will procurement as a role get to be very high end, like in a way your article suggests? That is, it's much more specialized, and at the more specialized and primarily technical space, the end consumer will sort of take over that role because it's so much easier to do that today.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many points, Zuhabajan. I really love to answer that one. Look, I don't want to disagree with the procurement professionals that you've spoken to. I mean, their assessment for their respective organization might be totally accurate, right? But let me put it maybe into context and talk a little bit about on how we're transforming as a procurement organization. So what I described early on, that procurement is that internal consultant that tries to build value and is not only focused on cost and that tries to find the best supplier capability to marry it with internal needs. This is really obviously the gold standard where a lot of procurement teams want to gravitate towards, right? Not everyone is there. There's a McKinsey study out there that says roughly 15% of every procurement organization is in that segment. And 70% are about to get into that space, and 10% are laggards, which are only focusing on cost. Now, we need to make a very important distinction here, though, between what we call indirect spend and direct spend. So direct spend is what I described earlier on, all the ingredients that go into a shampoo bottle or a baby diaper or pet food or whatever it might be, any kind of, again, product or service that directly affects the end product that is being sold by the respective organization. And indirect spend is any service, software, for instance, computers, whatever it might be, furniture, that helps the organization to fulfill their mission, right? So it doesn't go into the end product that the end consumer consumes. It just helps facilitating the process. Now, historically, procurement was focused on direct. Why? Because obviously the spend is much bigger, and it was easier, to your point, to make a black or white decision, right? Obviously, oil is oil. There's different grades, but you can specify it, right? You can specify clearly what it is and what it is not. Versus a software, even a mobile phone, a travel agency service, a marketing service, you have a lot of different opinions what good or bad looks like. It's very difficult to specify it. So procurement comes out of the direct area, and indirect is, for many organizations, virgin ground, right? Again, an organization such as Unilever, Hentschel, Procter Gamble, they do this already for 15 years. They have, again, very experienced procurement professionals that look into IT expenditure, software expenditure, service expenditure very professionally in the same way as I described it before. But for some other organizations, and maybe those organizations that you've interacted with, there's no procurement interaction whatsoever. Now, what tendencies do we see in the market? And we consult a lot of procurement teams and CFOs and CEOs, and what they tell us, what they would like to optimize, or what they consider as low-hanging fruit, is procurement stepping into this indirect area. You see that that many of these indirect areas are what we call non-optimized. So you have loads of suppliers. You have a lot of prices that probably are too high. Just to give you an example, a mid-sized company that doesn't have a procurement process in their indirect spend area probably has a good 10 suppliers for IT equipment, right? Is that really a good way dealing with things? I mean, or should you not have only 2 suppliers potentially? And this is exactly where the opportunity lies for procurement teams to step in and challenge the internal stakeholder and say, do we really need 10 software providers, computer suppliers, etc., or is maybe 1 or 2 sufficient? And if 1 or 2 are sufficient, what is it actually that we want to achieve with these guys? Should we focus on the innovation provider or on the commodity supplier? Now, obviously, what you are mainly dealing with, I suppose, is complex software tools. And let's maybe take that example for a moment, an ERP tool, which is not being bought every week, right? It's maybe bought, hopefully, only every 10 years or so, if the implementation succeeds. But it's obviously very complex. And you're right, procurement probably doesn't have all the details, but they're not supposed to be. What they're supposed to be doing in this area is to help and support the commercial thinking process of the internal stakeholders. So for instance, an IT department wants to buy an ERP system or a software tool, a chatbot, whatever it might be, and they come up with their needs. And procurement is there to be that commercial voice of reasoning to say, look, we already know that we have a good provider in that area. Why not considering them? Or we've seen in the market that there's companies consolidating or there's new providers coming up in the market. Have you considered them, IT director, right? So procurement builds a certain degree of knowledge in that market, not to the nth degree to understand all the technicalities of the product or service, but they have enough knowledge to build a certain credibility vis-a-vis their stakeholders to help them facilitate the process. And it's a common decision-making process then. It's not necessarily that procurement then calls the shots. It's a joint decision that is being made from the technical front and from the commercial front. But you're absolutely right. There's many companies out there where procurement is kept at arm's length from the internal stakeholders, from that IT director in that instance. And I had that in my personal career as well, where I was asked, Jens, please take over our indirect spend area. And a lot of internal stakeholders weren't happy with it because they said, look, I've bought this software and IT and support services all my career. That was the IT director talking. I don't need Jens to tell me what to buy and what not to buy, or with whom I should buy what. And this is what the big hurdle that procurement teams need to overcome. They need to build the credibility and then try to make their stakeholders feel comfortable that I'm not going to dictate you where you should be buying your services from. I'll just help you that your budget, takes you longer. Will be that we select suppliers that are best for our companies, that don't have underlying risk, for instance. I don't know, child labor, child exploitation, slavery, modern slavery, etc. All these things do exist also in the service area, which you want to obviously prevent and safeguard the organization from. So again, procurement is providing a service, but in this indirect area, there's still a lot of challenges for procurement teams, and I'm not surprised that many of your sales listeners out there might be confronted with a not very mature procurement organization on their customer side. But I can only reassure you that transition is progressing very fast, because we ourselves, use a lot of technology these days to advance our skills. So a procurement person that might not be very strategic yesterday might be actually much more engaged tomorrow because of this technological transformation that we're going through as a function as well.
Just to change track a bit, what kind of salespeople have you found who are really understanding these nuanced changes and who are sort of tuning themselves in, and how many are still trying to, better their cold call and better their script and so on? I mean, if you look at the discourse, even in LinkedIn, so many articles are about this clever script that worked and this clever call that worked and so on.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously I'm not, a sales professional, and you guys are much better in making sense of why a sales script still work. I can just give you my 2 cents from the buying side, and I always, I'm just always amazed that there's so much emphasis still being put on how do I convince somebody quickly, right? How do I convince somebody on a cold call? How do I convince somebody in the first meeting? It's all about, convincing somebody of something. And I always get the feeling a little bit, well, why do you need to convince somebody if your product or service is so great? It shouldn't be so hard to convince somebody that they should actually buy from you, right? And I think we, at least in the B2B world, I think we are looking too much into the B2C world and see what might work there. So it's a totally different animal, obviously, and try to replicate some of these learnings there into the B2B world and how to sell to professional buyers. And I would also argue, let's say in the past, where you were directly dealing with an IT director or an R&D team or a marketing team as a vendor, maybe this convincing tactics convincing tactics, probably that's how we should call them, didn't make sense, right? Because you didn't have a professional buyer on the other side. You had someone that probably had to be influenced to consider you as a provider. They didn't do buying as their day job. It was just, okay, we need to buy something. Let's go out and buy a new IT tool. But it wasn't their profession. And the change now is that you have a professional that does only that, right? He or she only thinks of how do I buy best, as I described it early on. So it's a paradigm shift. And I think me as a professional buyer, I don't want to be called. I mean, I got a lot of cold calls when I was still a buyer. Now I get all these beautiful LinkedIn messages as well. And I think it's if you see your buyer as a naive kind of person that wants to be enlightened about what you sell, then maybe these approaches work. But I think the buyer has matured and again is professionalized through the procurement function, and this is how you should approach them. And for me, it starts always with understanding the salespeople that really were successful with myself and the team that I managed. They understood what our business challenges were. They understood what my challenges were as procurement professional, and they provided me with insights, information, with a ready-made deck that I could just take from them, a PowerPoint presentation, and present it to my internal stakeholders to convince them to do ABC. the proactiveness, that is what really convinced me. For instance, a salesperson that says, look, we know that your competition is doing X, Y, Z in this area, and we were wondering, why are you not doing this, right? And here are some reasons why you should be doing it, because we know what your end consumer needs, right? We're not talking about pricing. This kind of sending an email to someone saying, hey, I can get you what you already buy for 10% less. Well, great, but as a buyer, this is not the main purpose, as I said. And on this very example, maybe, sorry, I'm digressing here a little, but there's so many, interesting stuff to talk about. The switching costs of a supplier are immense in any organization, right? So if you have a provider for software, for an ingredient, for a product, let me tell you, it's not because of 10% price difference that you change that supplier, because there's so many other factors that that provider offers you. Supply assurance, for one. That you can rely on the supplier supplying you when there's a crisis, for instance, that they give you preferential treatment, that they maybe have capacity to grow with you, that they provide you with innovation. And this is obviously not reflective in the price. So I think this narrative, or this attitude of I just need to convince somebody with a good pitch, and I just need to present them with a lower price that will win the deal, for me is, at least in the B2B world, I think a derelict of the past, or at least I haven't seen any studies that really showcase that this works very well with those of companies.
Absolutely, that was great. What kind of suppliers or vendors have actually engaged with you in advance without expecting or without really knowing that there is some purchase in the anvil, but they have engaged with you and continued to sort of understand your requirements and continued to inform you about things that are happening, what they're seeing, and so on? How many, if you take a pool of 100 vendors you have dealt with, what percentage did really do that with earnest, without the expectation that next month or next quarter you are going to give them an order?
Yeah, that's a good one. Probably not that many. I think what again in my early career, what we had to do, we had to explain to a lot of suppliers that we were dealing with, and with incumbent suppliers. We had to be very transparent with them what our goals are and what we expect from them, how they can win with us. Because as I said very early on, we can only be successful as buyers, we can only be successful as organization that we're representing if we have the best supplier capability out there. And in my view, there's a fight for the best vendors, for the best minds and products and services out there that any organization is engaging in. And only if you can brief your suppliers in the right way, they will be able to understand what they need to be doing to deliver value consistently, to be part of that supplier pool. Quite frankly, negotiation, RFQ, RFP is, in a matter of fact, just a waste of time. We need to streamline as much as possible, because you want to have supplier relationships that you can build on to build value for the organization. Yes, the financial part needs to be dealt with, contracts need to be put in place, but we as procurement professionals, we want to form partnerships based on which we can continually deliver value. Any negotiation process is always a challenge of the trusting relations that we've built. So from that perspective, you want to make that go away as much as possible and just focus on how can we work together in a collaborative way. Now, but to your point, there's still a lot of suppliers out there that don't necessarily understand that. And as I said, we had to proactively go out and explain to them that this is how we see the relationship progressing. And I do know as well that a lot of procurement teams, especially in smaller organizations, don't have that manpower, maybe don't have that skill set to do effectively what I just described, to handhold their supply base and to make them understand what it is that they actually need to be doing to build value continuously. Having said that, though, there were definitely suppliers out there that did understand, and I think what they've done best was to try to understand really what is the business case all about for procurement. And some of my suppliers were, for instance, very proactive and saying, Jens, can I spend some time in your production facility? I remember I was responsible for Pampers, for baby diapers, and all the ingredients that go into that product. And we had suppliers that asked us, hey, Jens, can we look on how you produce and what is happening? I mean, they were obviously, super removed from baby diapers. There were huge companies that produce commodities that would never get in touch with a baby bum in the end of the day. So they asked us really, okay, can we spend some time on your production facility, on your marketing team, with your end consumer to better understand what your company is all about, and based on which you define your KPIs. And that was the same case for services, where you have a service provider that steps up and say, look, I would like to spend some resources to better understand your organization. I come in for a week, for a month, and I'll just want to observe what is going on. And this is obviously requires a lot of trust. I'm not saying that you can open the doors to any kind of supply out there, but at least offering that and understanding that this is important was something that I've noticed very good vendors did proactively. And did so very well. And they didn't give me the impression that, hey, there needs to be a sale afterwards, but they just said, look, if you want me to be that great supplier and that great step-changing piece that you require for your business, I need to understand you fully, and here's or an upfront investment that I could do as a vendor. So those suppliers really succeeded quite well, but I do understand that not every vendor can do that. So a small advisor can always give anyone that is dealing with professional buyers or B2B customers in general is really assess the whole value chain, really look into where are the risks and opportunities at every node in the value chain, and then really put yourself into your customer's organization's mind and think of what would you do if it was your business, and then provide that kind of outcome and that finding to your buyer with not even talking about your product, but just about talking about this is what I would do. So this is always very much valued, especially by professional procurement teams, to get this outside-in view. This is probably what I've seen with high-performing vendors, what they've do well consistently.
The Buyer Side Chat is brought to you by Pitchlink, the buyer-seller engagement platform. Pitchlink enables high-quality interactions between buyers and sellers through presentation and discussion modules. Sellers create personalized sales presentations and reach out to prospects through a non-intrusive, buyer-qualified engagement. Pitchlink requires no installation or download and holds the entire repository of sales collaterals and buyer-seller conversation. Talk to us to know more about how you can engage with customers without intrusion. Call us on 650-847-5884. That is 650-847-5884.
Well, that's a wonderful note to wrap this chat up. But I really enjoyed chatting with you. And see, it opened up so much thoughts in my mind. I mean, I think I can literally go on for another hour. And I would really want to chat with you again, Jens. I mean, I think this is a dialogue we need to continue. This is a discourse which needs to be made public. And I really am grateful that you made time, and thank you very much. And I look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to that as well. Thank you.
Coming up in the next episode is a thought-provoking conversation with Kevin Dixon, founder of BoxStep, a buyer-centric sales platform. And we will discuss how he saw the buyer change in the decades that he has been on the other side. We have a fantastic lineup over the next couple of episodes, unraveling in depth how the real buyer buys. Stay tuned. Thank you for being with us today on the Buyer Side Chat. This is the podcast of record for the buyer side journey. And those who know, that's the journey that matters. We hope this conversation helped you with insights that you can go and apply right now to your own value transaction process. See you in the next episode of the Buyer Side Chat.